Now let's talk about property trust relationship. In 2 CFR 200 316, it talks about real property, equipment, and intangible property that are acquired or improved with a federal award must be held in trust by the non-federal entity as trustee for the beneficiaries of the project or program under which the property was acquired or improved. The federal awarding agency may require the non-federal entity to record liens or other appropriate notices of record to indicate that personal or real property has been acquired or improved with a federal award and that use and disposition conditions apply to the property. Procurements by states, 2 CFR 200 317. When procuring property and services under a federal award, a state must follow the same policies and procedures it uses for procurements from its non-federal funds. The state will comply with 2 CFR 200 321, 322, and 323 and ensure that every purchase order or other contract includes any clauses required by 2 CFR 200 327. All other non-federal entities, including subrecipients of a state, must follow the procurement standards in 200 318 through 200 327. And these are the general procurement standards as outlined in 2 CFR 200 318. The non-federal entity must have and use documented procurement procedures consistent with state, local, and tribal laws and regulations and the standards of this section for the acquisition of property or services required under a federal award or subaward. The non-federal entity's documented procurement procedures must conform to the procurement standards identified in 217 through 200 327. Non-federal entities must maintain oversight to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contracts or purchase orders. Procurement requirements are as follows. They must avoid conflicts of interest through written standards of conduct. You must apply full and open competition standards, develop statements of work, specifications, or invitations to bid or propose. Must avoid unusually restrictive requirements that might limit competition. Should seek the most economical procurement solutions based on a reasonable person's common sense. 2 CFR 200 319 talks about competition, full and open competition. All procurement transactions for the acquisition of property or services required under a federal award must be conducted in a manner providing full and open competition consistent with the standards of this section and 2 CFR 200 320. In order to ensure objective contractor performance and eliminate unfair competitive advantage, contractors that develop or draft specifications, requirements, statements of work, or invitations for bids or requests for proposals must be excluded from competing for such procurements. Some of the situations considered to be restrictive of competition include but are not limited to placing unreasonable requirements on firms for them to qualify to do business, requiring unnecessary experience or excessive bonding, non-competitive pricing practices between firms or between affiliated companies, non-competitive contracts to consultants that are on retainer contracts, organizational conflicts of interest, specifying only a brand name product instead of allowing an equal product to be offered, and describing the performance or other relevant requirements of the procurement, and any arbitrary action in the procurement process. 2 CFR 200 320 talks about procurement methods. There are procurement methods that apply to purchases that are under $250,000 and ones that are above. Micro purchases are up to $10,000, and with the new guidance, they're extendable to $50,000 with permission. Small purchases or simplified acquisitions can be made up to $250,000. Above $250,000, are procurement by sealed bids, which are often used for firm fixed price contracts, or procurement by competitive proposals. By publicizing an RFP or request for proposals, you must solicit an adequate number of sources, which means at least 3, must be awarded to the most advantageous responsible firm, and must have a written method to conduct technical evaluation and the selection of proposals. Other procurement factors include domestic preferences for procurements, procurement of recovered materials, contract cost and price, federal awarding agency or pass-through entity review, and bonding requirements, as well as contract provisions. Contracting with small and minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms, which is outlined in 2 CFR 200-321. The non-federal entity must take all necessary affirmative steps to assure that minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms are used when possible. Affirmative steps must include placing qualified small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises on solicitation lists, assuring that small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises are solicited whenever they are potential sources. Dividing total requirements, when economically feasible, into smaller tasks or quantities to permit maximum participation by small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises. Establishing delivery schedules where the requirement permits, which encourage participation by small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises, as well as using the services and assistance as appropriate of such organizations as the Small Business Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency of the Department of Commerce, and requiring the prime contractor, if subcontracts are to be let, to take the affirmative steps listed in paragraphs B1 through B5 of this section. Smart procurement tactics include the following: avoiding the use of time and materials contracts, applying value engineering or systematic and creative analysis, using a pre-qualified list of persons, firms, or products to secure goods or services, including strong administrative controls to ensure prompt and accurate settlement of all contractual issues, such as source evaluation, protests, or disputes and claims. 2 CFR 200-328 discusses financial reporting. The recipient and subrecipient must submit financial reports to the Federal Awarding Agency, the Federal Financial Assistance Management Improvement Act, FFAMIA, required OMB to streamline the reporting process using the SF 425, the Federal Financial Report, or the FFR. All federal agencies transitioned to the FFR as of September 30th, 2009. Recipients must certify the accuracy of its payment requests and financial reports, which is found in 2 CFR 200-415 for required certifications. The recipient must minimize the time elapsed between transfer of funds. The recipient must minimize cash on hand to avoid interest income owed to the federal government. Recipients should only draw down as much cash as is necessary for immediate needs of the grant project. And the recipient must return any interest earned on grant funds deposited in interest-bearing accounts. Federal financial reporting terminology includes cash receipts, the amount of actual cash received from the federal agency during the reporting period. Cash disbursements, payment for goods and services, the amount of indirect expenses charged to the award, and cash advances or payments made to subrecipients or contractors. Cash on hand, any available funds remaining after all program costs for a period have been paid. You don't want to be a high-risk recipient. Recipients that do not follow federal cash management requirements or consistently appear on agency reports of excessive drawdowns could be subject to specific award conditions or deemed high risk. Recipients could be denied eligibility for funding on future agency grant applications or be debarred or suspended from receiving future federal awards from any agency. Refer to 2 CFR 200-207, specific conditions, and 2 CFR 3474.10, clarification regarding specific conditions. Now let's talk about monitoring and reporting program performance. The non-federal entity is responsible for oversight of the operations of the federal award supported activities. The non-federal entity must monitor its activities under federal awards to assure compliance with applicable federal requirements and performance expectations are being achieved. Monitoring by the non-federal entity must cover each program, function, or activity. See also 2 CFR 200-332, pass-through entity responsibilities. Programmatic reporting is also a part of 2 CFR 200-329. The recipient must submit performance reports at the interval required by the federal awarding agency or pass-through entity. It must be no less than annually or no more frequent than quarterly. The final performance report will be due 90, well, with the new guidance, it's 120 days, 120 calendar days after the period of performance date. Recipient must monitor subrecipients' fulfillment of grant reporting requirements and ensure compliance and performance expectations are achieved. Program narrative reports. They're used to determine whether goals and objectives set forth in the grant application are on target to be met within the appropriate timeframe. It states specifically what is happening in relation to the project plan. Did the recipient hire an evaluator? Did it hire key personnel? Did it purchase required equipment? Does it have access to the target population? Have key activities taken place? If so, what were the outcomes? And did the recipient encounter challenges? If so, how were they overcome? The awarding agency provides oversight. The funding agency is responsible for ensuring federal guidance is followed, good financial practices are observed, and public funds are spent on activities that achieve the purposes of the award. The agency must validate program implementation and confirm compliance with federal requirements. It may take serious action to discover and stop instances of fraud, waste, and abuse, and/or may help recipients avoid negative audit findings and become model recipients. The awarding agency also monitors recipients. The agency is responsible for programmatic, performance, and financial monitoring of the recipient. The results of monitoring informs the provision and need for technical assistance to the recipient. Review of programmatic reporting and compliance is to ensure recipients' management of award funds is effective, efficient, and aligned with program goals. Awarding agency actions may be as follows: performing monitoring or site visits for ensuring that recipients comply with all financial and programmatic requirements, including reporting. Providing technical assistance to keep the grant recipient community informed about changes in the law, new emphases for public funding, and industry best practices for project execution. It can also initiate audits as often as annually. 2 CFR 200-330 talks about reporting on real property. The federal awarding agency or pass-through entity must require a non-federal entity to submit reports at least annually on the status of real property in which the federal government retains an interest, unless the federal interest in the real property extends 15 years or longer. If the federal interest is for a period of 15 years or more, the federal awarding agency or pass-through entity, at its option, may require the non-federal entity to report at various multi-year frequencies, for example, every 2 years or every 3 years, not to exceed a 5-year reporting period, or federal awarding agency or pass-through entity may require annual reporting for the first 3 years of a federal award and thereafter require reporting every 5 years. I'll pause here and resume shortly.